All right, folks. So this is a presentation seriously just on the data of OER and ZTC. And this was the actual Flex description. And I am so sorry, y'all. This is a very heavy text presentation. I threw in a whole bunch of different research and I was going to go back through and make it real beautiful. And so please do not feel in any obligation to read the slides. I will be summarizing them for you. But came about because I've had multiple faculty come up to me and say, "Hey, Rachel, I don't really feel like there's any data on OER. I feel like it's a flash in the pan. I don't really understand like why this is a thing." So the whole point of doing this was to make sure that there is something I can send to people when they do ask me about data, that something that I can make sure if people ask like, "Hey, where's the qualitative, quantitative mixed methods research on this?" I have something I can send y'all that's kind of an overview. So I'm just going to give y'all a couple definitions. I think most of y'all know them, but just in case, I'll give a couple definitions. This is really diving into the qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, longitudinal, meta-analysis, national state, and IVC demographic data as it relates to OER and ZTC. I'll talk briefly about information behaviors as well as some demographics. And at the very end, I will talk a little bit about how to switch to OER, but this is mainly one specifically looking at the data behind OER. And again, just warning on the walls of text. And since we're a small group, if someone has a question, you're welcome to just interrupt me. I don't see the chat as much, but I will see the chat at the end. And feel free to ask questions. And I'm also happy to send you any of this research because that's really what this is. It's just a ton of research. So what is the definition of OER? OER are teaching, learning, and resource materials that reside in public domain or have a Creative Commons license. So I'm just reading this for y'all. It's anything. It can be textbooks, course materials, modules. It can be videos, homework systems, anything that supports in the access to knowledge. And the core principles of OER, I like to say, are the 3 bullet points. Higher education is a human right. It leads to the democratization and decolonization of higher education. And it is strongly related to a core principle called knowledge justice, which is related to critical race theory and social justice in the field of information science, which is where the libraries reside. We reside in information science. It is meant to empower faculty legally to copy and use resources. So in the past, before the internet and right when the internet came about, there were a lot of people who would have readers and different things that were technically copyright infringement, but it was covered under fair use law, or at least they thought it was. Now, very little is actually covered under fair use law. So this is a very, very safe way to actually share and use resources. So when we talk about OER, we're really talking about the 5 R's. We're talking about retain, reuse, revise, remix, and redistribute, and it's under Creative Commons license and public domain. If it is not under one of these 2 licenses and does not have these 5 criteria, it is not a true OER. It's probably related to ZTC. So ZTC is just an outcome for students. That just means that it's 0 textbook costs for students. It could be an OER. It could be that you're linking out to copyrighted or proprietary resources that are just free online, which is very common. It could be that it's linking to library resources that are paid for by the institution, or it could be class sets that are purchased through grants, institution programs. Think of like the Promise program, Elevate, where students get the books for free. It is a 0 textbook outcome for students, but it actually could be very expensive if you're buying class sets. So depending on where we are in the research, sometimes we'll talk about ZTC initiatives, and sometimes we're actually talking more about OER because OER is the sustainable way to make ZTC happen. So the research is often interrelated. And just to give you guys a little bit of a Venn diagram, there's not a simple Venn diagram when it comes to OER and ZTC research and OER data. It's very messy, and you could take any one of these white words and make an entire research project on just that. You could look at OER and student success, or OER and student persistence, or equity data related to OER. There's so many different ways that OER and ZTC overlap with student success, with cost savings, with DEIA, with information science and information behaviors. So there isn't any one way to go about it. And this presentation is literally just to give you all an overview of a lot of the different kinds of research and the main consistent themes that we see regularly coming out of this research. Because again, the best research can be replicated, right? So some of these slides will be a little bit redundant because it's something that has been found multiple times in different ways. So there's about 40 years worth of data behind OER and ZTC. It came about, the OER movement or the open access movement came about at the same time as distance education in the 1946 South Africa DE program. It didn't get its official name though until 2002. It was when it got its official title, when it was really attached to the Creative Commons license. And soon after that, we had a whole bunch of peer-reviewed studies. So for about the last 26 years, we've had a ton of really hardcore peer review studies, but the open access movement has been studied since the 1950s, and it's been around for quite a while. So I have some faculty who talk about OER, and they talk about it in terms of legacy or pedagogical control. Others really are looking at it for equity and success metrics or political motivations. So this is just kind of an overview of some of the different pieces of the data. So the main one that is dear to my heart is that OER is an equity measure, and it helps implement DEIA in curriculum. And I'm just going to read the slide for y'all. It is inherently political. There's no way to separate OER from politics. It fights capitalistic systems, integrated voices from marginalized populations, lived experience. It has a lot of flexibility and representation and adaptability built into it. And it really is about access to higher education as a human right. So due to this, and due to the fact that you could put an equity framework on it, you can actually run the ASCCC OERI IDEA, which is Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Racism rubric, on an OER and then modify it in a way that you couldn't for a paid publisher textbook. So this is one of the main ways that I like to do research on OER, is looking at through the equity measures. So really you're looking at three big pots of content. You're looking at lower costs, automatically means higher access for marginalized students when you're breaking cost barriers. The second one is diverse perspectives. When you are increasing diverse perspectives and representation for marginalized people, you automatically have inclusion of marginalized voices. Representation also leads to more student engagement, which the last one, student and faculty empowerment. Students that are empowered, students often are more engaged, and faculty academic freedom and customization also increase. So why does IVC need an OER program? I hear all the time, but Rachel, like IVC is in a high economic area, we're doing fine, we have good enrollment. So let's dive into some of the more hardcore data. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. And this is a lot of just aggregation. If anyone has any specific question on any of these data points, I will send you the articles or the government data on this if you would like. So the textbook cost crisis. So the average student spends, it's actually on the high end now, about $1,500 per year on books and supplies. 65% of students report skipping at least one required textbook because of the price. Textbook prices have risen way faster than inflation, and I have a whole slide on that. Community colleges spend more than their four-year peers. And it's literally more than 57 now of students take fewer classes because of textbook costs. 21% skip buying an access code for homework in 2020, and it's just continuing to go up. So it's an ongoing crisis. And when we talk about financial impact, we're really looking at the cost for the student per month, per semester, or per year. We're looking at this 65% number of students that are skipping buying textbooks. And then we're looking at the overall national savings for students when we use OER. So those are the big three pots that we're looking at. And on average, these numbers remain pretty consistent. So people say, well, Rachel, cost savings is just one thing, though. That's not that big of a deal. One textbook doesn't make or break the bank. And the reality is affordability is a social justice issue. So we are currently running a survey. It is live as of right now with our students. And I pulled phrase clouds these are phrases directly from our data that we're gathering. So this is from our IVC students. And the question was, if I don't have to pay for textbooks, what would you do with that money? And the results were overwhelmingly things like food, gas, living expenses, family needs, car payments, and rent. There wasn't anyone who was like, oh, I'm going to go out and go to more movies, And there were a couple kids who said things like, oh, I'd actually take more classes, or, oh, I'd be able to get to work easier. So things like that. So the reality is that affordability is a social justice issue. When we talk about OER, sometimes that gets overlooked. So the other one that people always balk at is the 65% of students skipping buying textbooks. They say, Rachel, that's absolutely impossible. There's no way over half of my students are not buying the textbook. And here's where the actual data came in. So in 2020 and then again in 2024, national studies found that 65% of college students reported skipping buying the textbook, even though 90% of them were worried it would hurt their grades. And then this was actually found again in a smaller study in Florida. And so I have people say, well, Rachel, IVC is different. We're not like that, though. That's not us. That's national data. So again, from this survey, we asked this question, have you ever tried to complete a class? And we're at 62.7%. And if you look at some of the little tiny ones that we added, because I always ask leave an other option in surveys. it was things like, oh, well, the Promise program pays for it. I have Elevate, like these different things that basically, when you add up those numbers, we're at almost the same, 65%. So this number isn't going down. And people ask all the time, why is 65%? That's more than half of our students are not buying textbooks. There's a lot of theories in the research, depending on which direction you go with it. Information overconfidence in student populations is actually one that we're seeing on the rise in library data. So if you look at some of the 4-year library research studies, they're looking at information behaviors of digital natives in the information age, and they're finding that a lot of students are very overconfident about what they can or cannot find online. Then you have the state of capitalism, right? We're in late stage capitalism, cost deterrence, financial burdens, which we already covered. A new one that we're just starting to look at is something called hyperbolic discounting. This is related to temporal myopia and preference reversal. So this is where a student, when they go to register for classes, the main thing they're looking at is the teacher, they're looking at the time of day, but then it's discounted, right? So the preference reversal happens when suddenly first week of class, the textbook becomes really, really important. And so then they just don't buy the textbook. And then the last one is accessibility timelines and just operations of the bookstore registration. If they registered late, if they get into the class late, if they've had other weird registration fees that came up at the last minute. So a lot of it could be based on the operations. So think about compounding variables. Now, these are all old data. This is all data that's over, I want to say almost 20 years old. And I want you to think about how much inflation has increased in the last 5 to 10 years. And this is before that. So college textbook prices increased 186% between 86 and 2004. And that was double the rate of inflation. And then from 2002 to 2012, they basically increased 82% compared to 28% was the consumer price. And so basically, compared to the CPI inflation, we're looking at double the rate. And it just means that the textbook industry is extremely predatory. They know that students need these books. They know that students are hoping for a better life. And so they're really capitalizing on this. And it's a $4 billion a year industry as of right now. And I totally wish OER had the textbook industry shaking in its boots, but we really don't yet. So even when students can afford to purchase the book, often they don't for many of these compounding variables. And with access to AI, these information behaviors, they're not reverting. They are changing, but we're not reverting back to what we had in the past. So part of the reason for that is some other contextual data. So most of these are actually from, I'm going to go through like 6 of them. They are from 2005. This is from the RP group, and this is specifically about California community college students. So 67% of our students experience at least one form of basic needs insecurity. 46% of our students face food insecurity. 58% of our students face housing insecurity. 20% of our students experience homelessness in the past year. And then this one's from 2018. 17% of students changed their mind because of high textbook prices. And the reason I tell you this one is because in 2024, 72% of students avoided certain courses or changed majors due to textbook expenses. So what we're seeing in the behavior of information science within student behavior is that students are just not taking the classes if they can't afford the textbooks. So I've had a couple faculty say things like, well, Rachel, I know my students don't mind paying for my textbook, or my students have never had a problem getting the textbook. How many students never even signed up for a class or switched majors when the textbook got too expensive? And that's what we're starting to see more and more of is this data. That's a massive leap. And this is specifically within California data. So let's talk a little bit about demographics. And again, this next slide is massive and overwhelming, so please do not feel obligated to read it. So student populations that have the strongest effects, positive effects, due to OER or ZTC implementation are Pell Grant recipients, first-generation students, part-time and working students, and historically underserved students. And the College of the Canyons ran a really beautiful study, and they found that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous actually did way better student success and completion in specifically OER and ZTC courses. So this has been an ongoing thing. These are the 4 main groups of students that do much better when you have ZTC and OER courses. And here's where you really get into some of the details with the research. So the highest level of insecurity exists within African American and Black students, American Indian, LGBTQ+, students aged 26 to 30, single parents, Pell Grant recipients, former foster youth, and justice impacted or rising scholars. And the reality is there is OER research now tied to the success metrics for all of these different demographics. It's been pretty interesting to go through this and start pulling out the demographic data to be able to separate it by these different demographics. And the reality is you have a lot of intersectional identities that are really, really supported by OER implementation. So the question we get all the time is, well, does OER work as well, though? Is it a lower quality? Are we lowering the quality of our content in order to make something ZTC for students? And this is where we have a lot of qualitative data and meta-analyses that have been done that basically show that the learning outcomes are either the same, which is still better because then the student didn't have to pay anything and the learning was the same, or the learning outcomes were better. Across dozens of courses, there is no decrease in grades, and a lot of them actually have a higher pass rate and a lower drop rate. For certain areas, the lower drop rate was more exponential, and in other places, there was a higher pass rate. Removing textbooks does not harm learning and actually improves it because a lot of students actually have access to the book. They're actually interacting with the book. A lot of mixed methods are actually showing increased student engagement with the course. We actually have a presentation later today at 3 where we're going to talk about OER AI bots with the textbook integrated, where you can have assignments where students interact with the actual text. So if you've ever thought, my kids just aren't reading the text at all, OER provides opportunities for you to have your students engage with the content in different ways. And faculty do report that there seems to be more students connecting with the content and that they find it to be the same quality. And the students always report the same, that they feel less stressed and more prepared when using OER and ZTC. So then the other element of this data is you can actually look at academic performance data as it comes to OER and ZTC. The peer-reviewed research, students perform better or the same with OER. And because of this, especially when compared to commercial textbooks that have a cost, automatically, even if the performance is the same, OER is the easier choice for students in order to encourage academic performance. The achievement gaps shrink, especially for underrepresented and low-income students or low socioeconomic status. And then course completion actually increases with textbook cost barriers are removed. And time to degree or persistence data also has a great way of being improved when it comes to OER implementation. I'm sure I'm just making you guys so bored here. And then the academic performance continued. So there was a study that was done in 2018 that analyzed over 20,000 students across multiple institutions. And they found that OER users had a pass rate of 5% higher than non-OER students. And this was especially pronounced with Pell Grant recipients and part-time students. So this is one of those things where people are like, well, what does OER do? Is it just about cost? And no, it actually leads to a lot of really great benefits for our students. And we now have a lot of data to back that up. So if you look at student success metrics, you've got pass rates, completion rates, satisfaction, and material accessibility, all higher with OER. And then a little bit more qualitative meta-analysis, you've got students perceive they do better in classes with OER. If a student is perceiving that they're going to do better, then they automatically do better with that whole self-fulfilling prophecy. Data shows that students perform the same or better. We've already talked about that. There were a lot of meta-analysis. So these were additional meta-analysis that were pulled out. And then faculty perceive OER as increasing student engagement, which we've also already talked about. But these were additional studies that were found in more qualitative studies and not just meta-analysis. So beyond cost savings, there's a pedagogical advantage for faculty. There's extreme customization. You have continued improvement as you see fit as the subject expert. As we're seeing neurodivergent students and we're seeing students with shorter attention spans due to social media, you as a subject expert have the opportunity to tweak the material however you see relevant for your local students. And it does enhance accessibility and collaboration. I know a lot of faculty who get really into letting their students help create textbooks or update textbooks, letting their students contribute to the textbooks, which actually makes the student understand and start interacting with the content in different ways. So how can OER benefit faculty? We talked about it a little bit already, but really there's a lot of different pieces to this, and faculty choose it for a lot of different reasons. Some people choose it for the legacy and the flexibility because they want to stick it to the commercial textbooks. Others because they want to integrate marginalized racial identities and representation. Others because they want real control. They don't like the chronological version. They want to make it thematic or vice versa. Universal design learning as well as curriculum autonomy. Student persistence and completion, student success, all of those things that we've talked about already. It really depends. And then there's also the IDEA rubric, which is the inclusion, diversity, equity, and anti-racism rubric that you can apply to your content and then modify it. And you can't do that to commercial texts. But regardless of which one faculty choose, what's really fun about it is they may start with one thing, but you end up with an intersectional impact, right? Even if you're just looking at, I want my kids to engage more with this content, you are also automatically having students who are more engaged with this content and you're helping with a lot of equity metrics, even if you're just looking at one of these different pieces. So you end up with a really fun intersectional impact. So, what does this matter? Why does this matter for me personally? So, as a librarian, if even a single student is choosing between dinner and a textbook, to me, that's too many students, especially when there is so much OER content out there now. And the OER committee has funds that we can pay you to make an OER textbook now. So, you can get paid for the transition, basically, for giving up your intellectual property and creating something that's an OER. I meant to make this slide prettier and I didn't. So, when we talk about building as you go, because that's often what faculty are doing, think about while you teach right now. You guys are already locked into textbooks. You already are locked into a specific curriculum. While you start teaching, start brainstorming while you teach. Make a list of what it is that you would need to create. So as you're going through each module or each class, make a list of things that are commercial textbook. Maybe it's just the textbook. Maybe it's the textbook and homework systems. And think about what you would want to create yourself, what you actually would want to change. And then feel free to reach out to me. I can give you a list of a whole bunch of stuff that's already created so you do not have to build from scratch. So you have a lot of options when it comes to OER. You can do straight adoption. This is where I send you a whole bunch of OER. The Academic Center for Community Colleges Open Education Resource Initiative has multiple textbooks they built that were built by and authored by faculty across California. There is also adapting, and this is actually the one that we recommend. This is where you take a whole bunch of different OER content and it's like raw clay. You can do anything you want with it. It's not plagiarism because it's under a Creative Commons license. So think of being able to take a 1,000-page book and modify it to fit your needs however you want, in whatever way you want. You have full control. You can perfectly align it with IVC curriculum. And then on top of that, it's free for students. You can author from scratch. We don't recommend this unless it's a really niche topic that doesn't have anything, which is pretty rare. So there is an OER committee, there's an OER program, and I am your OER librarian at IVC, and we are here to support you in this work. If you are willing to make local IVC OER that would lead to a ZTC course, there are stipends available. Feel free to email me. And then briefly, because these are things that are redundant, just other studies that I found that I have, there's a whole bunch of other studies on this. So if you're like, Rachel, I'd really like more on something specific, I am happy to send you stuff on the drop rates, on progress to degrees, on meta or peer review confirmation. If you want something more on the equity lens, you want to look at a UGA study looking at Pell Grant eligibility for students or basic needs and how OER affects them. There's so many different things about this work. And the reality is that OER is really, really helpful for a lot of different kinds of students. So I burned through all that content in 25 minutes. If you'd like to know more about OER data or ZTC data, please feel free to reach out. On the screen is also a LibGuide. So this is a LibGuide that I have created for IVC faculty, and it is literally a do-it-yourself. It has all the step-by-step instructions. It has flowcharts. I also can send you a whole bunch of AI bots that basically act as flowcharts if you want to ask it a whole bunch of questions back and forth. I'm happy to do that as well. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'm going to stop the recording. Let's see, where is the recording? Pause. Stop recording. There we go.